Hello, listeners, and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. Bit of a strange one today because we're going to be talking about a load of random crap no one's probably going to follow along with or understand. But you know what? It doesn't matter because it makes perfect sense to us. So, textiles magic meets planetary magic. Now, let's dispense with the basic crap where we make puppets and such, and let's talk about proper craftsmanship. Now, we have an expert textilian. What do you call an expert in textiles?
A textiles expert.
Textilian. We have an expert textilian, and we have a Bristolian.
Yes.
So, we're going to talk about textiles magic.
Okay.
So, I've noticed, right, it's a funny thing that I noticed a couple of centuries ago, and that is that all of the really old school forms of witchcraft and magic, in this planet anyway, we're talking about Earth, a lot of it, there's a lot of magic within textiles. It's a very old thing, isn't it, textiles? And I think it's a very underestimated thing. Now, I'm no good with textiles and have no interest in it whatsoever, but I do have an appreciation for the art, and I do see the magic in it. To take tiny little fibers and turn them into something actually tangible that you can wear and infuse with magic. The amount of effort that goes into handmade textiles is magic in itself. I mean, when it comes to looking at someone like yourself, when you've done weaving and stuff like that, and you talk about weaving spells, and you think the hours that it takes for you to make something and concentrate on that thing, ignoring any magical timings and other influences and such, but just the actual time it takes for you to craft something and then use it for magic, compared to the person that goes and buys a puppet from our shop and stuffs it in 2 minutes, or buys a candle. If you're a hoodoo expert, and by expert I mean bought several books on hoodoo and bought several oils from a hoodoo practitioner shop and bought several candles where half of the stuff's done already for you and you've just really got to open the can and use it. I don't see this that much, the actual real beauty of craftsmanship within magic. What have you got to say about that? Am I right? Am I wrong? Am I not picking up on something? Is textiles really magical at its core?
Well, the thing is, I suppose it depends on how you look at it, really. I think any craft can be applied magically. I think what's special about textiles is that it's worn so close to your body. So I think part of the fact is it's, people don't think of clothes as art you wear every day, whereas actually probably that's what they should be thinking. Which I know goes slightly fashionista for too many people, but it is just the fact that this is the one item, because most of us don't walk around naked since Adam and Eve, so you kind of the fact that you wear clothes every day and it's things that you can't live without seems to.
Unless you're a gardener.
Well, yeah, so it seems kind of lost on a lot of people. And when you think the time and effort that goes into people, production of clothes as a world business, now at the point of, fast fashion, and I won't get all political and eco about it, but just kind of like, the fact that spends the most time closest to you than anything else that you use in your day-to life. Yes, you use the bathroom and you use the toilet and the toothbrush. All those things have to be there, but
well, you can just have a wee in the shower. That saves all kinds of time.
You're dressed in these things all day long, which is kind of why I often suggest making puppets out of X's underwear and stuff like that is the easiest way to make sure it's well and truly imbued with the energy of the person you're trying to punish. But when you go to that next level where you're saying, do you know what, I'm actually going to make the cloth or the part of it itself, you go into that next level, and you can kind of add all sorts of mythology in there, can't you, with the Nerns or the Norns or the Morai, all these kinds of ancient spinners of prophecy, spinning the web of your life. There is that kind of, and it is interesting because particularly with the Greek words, and again, I won't go off too much on a tangent, but the roots of the words are, you use weaving terminology every day in most of the words and colloquialisms that you use. How we, weave a story, or we spin a tale, or any of those, even making ends meet. These phrases are all in your life every day, and they're all
Yeah.
textile words. So it is innately part of who we are as human beings. Hunter gathering and we clothe. Those are kind of, killing things and dressing ourselves are kind of the cause of what make ourselves us. But so I think it's obvious that those sorts of things should happen. Also, like I said, the process of creating anything is going to have an innately magical quality to it. The same if you're a blacksmith or a woodworker. The only difference is textiles are in every part of your life. So, from your bedclothes to the car that you drive, every part of the flame retardant fabrics that you're sat on, that if the car goes up in flames will probably last better than you will. Or the sutures that are used in operating theatres, all of its textiles in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's kind of lost on a lot of people. But no, it is there. So magical yarns make sense to me.
Yeah. Textiles has been something that's been super important very early on in human civilization and for humans, and as has the sky and the stars and the planets. So you look at really ancient forms of magic, there's a lot of looking at the sky and assigning meanings and deities and spirits and stuff to planets, and also a lot of the most powerful goddesses and stuff like that that you look through from ancient cultures also have, they're to do with textiles a lot of the time as well, you'll see. So let's marry these two things together. So if we're looking at common threads, see what I did? Common threads between different magical culture, well, cultures in general, because every culture really has some degree of magic in it. You've got universal principles that you can see displayed. This is all that good that they don't tell you about, that they were generally, you get all of these books and things like that that drag a massive great book on, only to turn around and say, well, this is the common ground that everyone shares, the universal truth. Let's discuss something like that
Okay.
now. We'll see where this goes. So we've got everyone looking at and assigning meanings to planets and things like that. You've got the ideas of things like representational magic, which comes up a lot. Now, tying all these things together, no matter where you go in the world, it seems like all of these energies and things, they're there, you find them there, even if these cultures haven't necessarily seen, or met each other, they still have the same energies assigned to them, you see them the same, they're still using them, that kind of thing. Although technology may progress in certain directions in other cultures as opposed to certain ones, is one of those things. So, what is up with that? That's what people seem to want to know. I mean, if you ask a certain person, they'll say, well, I don't know what the question was, but the answer is always aliens. If you speak to other people, they'll say, well, the gods and goddesses of, Adam and Eve and all that kind of stuff. The gods said, oh, well, we've taught you this, this is what you do, and everyone just comes from Adam and Eve, and if Adam and Eve knew it, then their descendants, you know, taught it to more and more descendants, so on and so forth, what have you. And then you've got the other people that's kind of like, well, all of these people actually do talk to each other, and, you know, Pangea and all that stuff. So I don't know, where are we standing on this? What goes on with all of this? Because you see an evolution certainly when it comes to technology, don't
Well, I
you?
actually tried to explain
But it's
this.
not so much a straight line. It's not a straight line, is it? It goes up and down. People invent certain technologies and then lose the information and the knowledge, only to be found later.
Yeah, I tried to explain this to a mundane this morning.
Oh dear.
It went quite successfully, I think. But yeah, I actually
What did you say? There aren't really little people in the television? Is that what it was?
no, it wasn't quite that basic. But essentially, I tried to break down the universe into streams of energy and explain that, and this will be controversial for some people, hopefully none of the ones listening, but um, that applying I was trying whether or not you'll correct me or not will be interesting here. So I
Okay.
tried to explain that how all cultures technically have it right. What they'd fail to understand in a lot of senses is that they're all talking to the same energy streams. It just wears a different face when it approaches them. So I was trying to explain how all these Christian. I can't think how we got onto it actually. I think we were talking about how bad the church was, and but never mind. But we got
This isn't that person that's been drinking, offering blood up, is it?
no.
Because I know there's quite a few people on the books at the moment that are going through this
No,
process
this
of
is
learning
a
the
true
you
mundane.
learn the periodic table. You learn the periodic table in science, and then you've got to learn the energetic periodic table in magic.
Yeah. So no, this was
This was a
complete.
complete
This
mundane.
complete mundane who has no real use for magic whatsoever. Has never really touched upon it. I'm trying to think if she's even actually done one of my classes. I don't think she has. Um, so you see, yeah. So this is a complete mundane that somehow we ended up on this path talking about it. I may have been oversharing. I don't know. Um, about my true self, but that was anyway. We ended up with this discussion about energy and gods and goddesses, and me trying to explain that in very loose terms, depending on what part of the world you're in. Because we were talking about death. That's what it was. We were talking. She was asking questions about why the Victorians were so prudish, and then I think I went on a long
Oh,
rant.
okay.
I think that's what happened. Anyway, so I was trying to explain that it's all the same energy stream, and that obviously to the Mexicans, for example, Santa Muerte may appear to them, but then to a Greek person, maybe they would have Hades or Persephone, or if parts of the kind of Romanesque might have Hecate, and actually that the actual presence of said energy is just the face it was wearing at the time in order for our very simple human minds to comprehend, rather than necessarily that these all exist separately. So I was trying to, obviously they do, and I'm not going to go into the complications of that, but the fact that they all exist within the same energy stream, and that you could break down the universe into these energy streams. And the controversial bit was obviously where
Hashtag planetary
yeah,
magic.
where I was, whereas I was referring to obviously the god as just another one of these solar entities. Um, and you could
Oh, so a lesser
so
one
you could line
then.
one up with say Apollo or Helios, or you know
So basically, you upset someone by saying Jesus is Apollo.
basically not even that. I got
Same
as
old
far as saying
solar story.
same old solar story over and over again. um but I was explaining kind of like you would understand that I was trying to explain that in that moment of you being approached by someone like Apollo, how it would appear to you would have to fit within your paradigm and within your understanding, and therefore that would appear completely different to me. Apollo would appear completely different to me than he would to you, dependent on your reality, your understanding, and your paradigm specifically. Um, and talking about energy streams that govern construction and creation. And then her head exploded, and I cleaned up the mess, and then I walked back home.
Okay. I would agree in principle, but what I would say is I think that it gets a little bit more complicated than that the more you delve into the
Yeah, of
story, like
course.
with anything. I think that the problem with this sort of thing, because we don't know who's listening, or we have a rough idea of who's listening, but at the same time, there's a lot of unknowns out there. If you talk to someone at their level, but taking someone from talking about and having a conversation now, we've got to take it from a super basic to a slightly more advanced. So I would say that yes, all of these energies and things like that, I'd think of a periodic table as pure, trying to go as pure as possible to specific energies. But then at the same time, you blend, much
Yeah,
like with textiles, you can blend things together that then become an extra energy. So normally I try to teach people in a practical way. So it's what are the practical energies, the practical pure energies that you as a human can relate to and are useful. Normally I'd break it down in terms of planets because planetary magic is a really, really easy thing to research.
very much
And
so.
then what comes out of those currents, so the death current, the personification of the death current, what comes out of that to you? How does the death current want to manifest to you in terms of sentience, so having a sentient conversation with it, how does that come out? And then also you've got the fact that if you're blending these currents together, it goes back to the old kind of family tree, I suppose, of gods and pantheons and stuff like that,
Yeah,
which you've got the older generation, then you've got the newer generation, then you've got the current generation, which is basically the ones that people consider to be god and goddesses. So
yeah,
whether it's kind of like the Titans and all of that kind of thing, and then you've got the Olympics later. You've kind of got generations there, I suppose, in terms of purity of energies. But then at the same time, you've got blendings of their children as well. So if you've got a blend between one energy and another, and when you talk to most things, the closer it is to physical world and the lower vibration, I suppose you might say, um, the entity or spirit is, the more you'll find that it is comprised of multiple energies. So when you take a person, you're going to find that they have, or anything physical essentially, you're going to find that they have all of these energies in abundance. The further you go deep down, you'll find that if you get involved with the certainly what we call dissection, I suppose, of spirits and the
yeah,
taking apart and understanding how spirits work, you then start to see differences. But that's not a practice that gets talked about a lot in
no,
everyday magic, and that's not something you see everyday magical practitioners. I've said time and time again to people, well, okay, you've been working with this goddess. What is this goddess comprised of? Well, I don't know. She's a goddess. She's an all-powerful goddess. Like, okay, what's she made of?
yeah,
How did she interact? You know, that kind of thing. What is it comprised of? And you'll see that these things are a mix of different energies. And then you'll find that certain things are actually predominantly one energy, and then other things further up the food chain or hierarchy, as you might probably think of it from a human perspective, they're more pure, so they're only within one energetic current essentially. And then we go beyond that as well. So it's a complicated thing, but if we look at it from because we've kind of started looking at it from working with spirits, if we take that and look at it from a secular perspective and more of a scientific perspective, and just talking about energy currency, ignore all the gods and goddesses and that kind of thing, and just put it blip as a basic, okay, you've heard of the periodic table in school of things that, you know, objects and stuff in the universe are made out of. Well, what if I was to tell you there is a magical, energetic periodic table? What would that look like? So, you know, what does that look like to you? I'd be interested.
Well,
Or how would you
obviously,
teach it?
these days, obviously, I move slightly more towards the more experience I've had with it in recent years. I found that the kind of with the Tree of Life is a good
You mean you're
methodology.
copying me? You're copying
Yeah,
the way I
just
teach people.
because it wouldn't have occurred to me before meeting you to do it that way. But then I don't I don't try to strip something back to its elemental form. So its based on the periodic table for me wouldn't be that, for lack of a better word, basic. So I would
Yeah,
happily be working with them in their blends, understanding exactly
yeah.
what they were. So I would have probably done something far more complicated and approached them through emotion. So I would have broken every single one down into an emotional energy level, or what I wouldn't call, which would complicate things for most people, taste. Um, and
Based
I
on
would
what they
say
taste like.
I would base everything on what they taste like, which obviously to me makes total sense. And we would probably, because most of the people that I'm training or working with are human, they would understand emotional levels and emotional quantification. Whereas
Unless they're a
actually,
sociopath.
unless they're a sociopath, in
Like
which
me.
case, something like the Kabbalah Tree of Life would actually make a lot more sense. So actually, the more I've worked with it over the last couple of years, it's made more and more sense to me as a methodology. It doesn't mean that I've left my old methodology behind, but there are certain types of clients and mentees that
Hmm.
that approach really works.
Well, it's because of the culture we live in. I mean, we live in predominantly in the West, secular culture, scientific reductionist science, which basically starts at the basics and then works up. Whereas we're in the magical community used to working from the top down. So to
Yeah,
try and add complexity is literally like we're almost doing essentially like science back in this is an atom, and then
yes,
underneath an atom's this, and above an atom, when you join bunches of atoms together, you get this,
yeah,
you know, that kind of thing. We try to take it from that perspective because I think that that's how the mind works for most Western people now because they've been through the education system and that's what it's like. Um, so essentially, you're talking about a system of understanding the universe, an almost complete system, or possibly an actual complete system of magical practice for a human.
yes,
So with that, you'd essentially get to understand how everything works and technically how to manipulate and change everything, which there is a danger to. But there's control mechanisms for such things, isn't there?
well, yes, there
But
has to
we've
be
talked
control
about,
mechanisms.
obviously, yeah, we've talked about what you would do with this, because obviously, as most people know, we run a witchcraft shop and we do create products. Most products that we've come to talk about now, the conversation's been, can we get away with actually releasing that so some random people's allowed to buy that? Is that too
Yeah,
dangerous? You
yeah,
know, it's kind of like from actual practitioners that understand the implications of the object, then that's fair enough. But a lot of the time, it's a case of you're putting your own power behind this and using your knowledge to cheat the system to make a tool that interacts with the universe on a way and on a level that's beyond the scope of most people. And you're making that a tool, therefore, it's easy to use, you know? It's basically a here, I've made a gun now, you don't need to learn how swords work.
Yeah,
Just point and shoot.
but at the same time, I think we always approach a new product by looking at it that way. So with the magical yarns, for example, I make them in a way that makes sure that it's not my energy going in, and actually it's just the purer version of that as I can possibly do without having an impact. So drawing it in
That's
order to capture.
That's talismanic magic, basically, isn't it? When you're
Yeah,
creating talismans, you've made talismanic yarns. For those that don't really know what a talisman, you're talking about creation of an object or a thing that retains a certain energy, a specific energy, current, vibration, whatever it is, that's created for that purpose. Now, the real thing that people struggle with, because you're used to books on ceremonial magic and things, probably saying, create this talisman of this, create this talisman of that, when they get a superficial, I think, idea of what does that energy do? Mars. What does Mars do? Well, I suppose it's good and destructive, so I suppose I'll use it for destroying my enemies or protection or something like that. But what they struggle with is the combination and the crazy things you can do with combining those energies together. So if you're talking about creating a talisman of talismans, and not a talisman of talismans like Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all. You're talking about blending energies together to create something else, something, you know, more specific that's being used over multiple energies. I know when we do talismans, or when I've done talisman classes and stuff like that, I tend to stick to pure energy forms that people are used to,
yes,
and can research and stuff. But actually, the implications of tying these energies together can explode in people's faces more so than in the actual pure energy forms. Because
yeah,
at one point you're talking about in chemistry, okay, I've got some dangerous chemical, but at least I know that's a dangerous chemical. But what happens if I mix a dangerous chemical with some unknown chemical I don't really understand? Oh, it blew up in my face, you know? It's fascinating and fun, but there's a danger to it. But yeah, your planetary yarns, why don't you talk us through that? Because we've got about 2 minutes before the main podcast ends, and then we'll start to talk about um, binding Saturn to a, what was it you were saying, one of those hourglasses and stuff like
yeah.
that. Because I've got a lovely picture that goes with that I
So
found the other day.
So yeah, so for those, it's a case of okay, so they're created in a way, and there's YouTube videos and stuff about it. So it's not like you're reliant purely on this if you are interested. But it is a case of for me, so spinning and plying a yarn of multiple lengths combined together allows me to create a yarn that you could then use in the way that they are constructed rather, allow me to put the energy in without getting involved. So I can draw the energy in, put the energy into a specific thread, then bind them together and allow you to use that in any way you like. So the nice thing about it is most people would get stuck going, oh well, if I wanted to make a magical hat and knit myself a magical hat, I would need to actually use a hell of a lot of it. And the fact is, no. Actually, the idea is that you can add that small programmer, shall we say, to a larger piece. So it might be that actually you use that thread in order to sew a button on, or if you were to put a sigil, stitch a sigil on the inside lining of something, could be done with these planetary yarns in order to actually add that energy or program the greater being of that work. So you don't necessarily need to be a weaver yourself or a knitter or some kind of crafter in order to use them. What it might be is that you just simply replace the cord that you were going to close that bag or gree um, with this yarn instead, and therefore imbuing it with the energy of that particular planetary alignment. There you go.
Yeah, so essentially you're talking about it is a battery of a very specific type of power. Now, unfortunately, we are now out of time for the regular podcast, but we will continue on for the Patreon. So